In this video, I'm going to share my top 10 secrets to becoming a much better and confident presenter. My name's Dr. Sahand. I've been a lecturer at Sydney Uni for just over 3 years now. I work as a radiographer at Loomis Imaging, and I also make content for YouTube and other platforms in my spare time. And I wanted to make this video because it's something that I really struggled with when I was younger and kind of still to this day. So we recently had our master's students do their presentations, and as I was marking them, I was taking notes on what made their presentation effective. They're a really wonderful and hardworking group of students, and I just wanted to know what drew me in and what made their presentation so effective. So I've taken those notes in addition to some notes I've taken from people I really admire that are really excellent presenters to put it all into one video. And note, this is something I did for myself when I was up and coming to become a much better and confident speaker. And stay tuned to the end where I'll show you my bonus tip which will really take things to the next level. All right, let's get into it. So tip number 1 is know your audience. This is really important because it really sets the precedence of how you deliver your presentation. If your audience is, for example, a bunch of high school students or university students studying the same thing that you're presenting about, then your delivery to these different types of groups is going to be different. The different words that you use, how clearly you speak, how fast you can get away with speaking, all of that comes into account when you acknowledge who your audience is. The most common example I can think of is when university students are presenting to their peers. Just remember, your peers also know what the basic terms mean, so you don't really need to go and explain those things. However, if you're presenting to another group of university students or a bunch of academics that are not within your field, that's when you need to take the time and explain the basics before you move on to the main concept. And I encountered this all the time when I was presenting my PhD work or sort of in the middle of my PhD work. I would go to a particular conference or particular talk that I had to give, and I would always be told, by the way, just remember the people you're presenting to are not in medical imaging, so they're not going to understand the basics. You have to set the groundwork for them to be able to understand your main points. However, if I'm presenting to someone within the medical imaging department, I'm not going to go through those basics, and I'm just going to probably skip that or have that as assumed knowledge and then move on to the meat of the discussion. And one of my favorite science communicators, Neil deGrasse Tyson, would always say this. Before he would go and give a talk, he would research who his target audience is and then tailor the jokes and the different delivery of his talk to that audience. So you could technically have one talk but have it almost be 3 or 4 different talks depending on who your audience is, because your delivery is going to be different. And speaking of knowing your audience, if you're a radiographer or sonographer looking for your next role, maybe one that better fits your lifestyle or career goals, then Unite Healthcare, who is very kindly sponsoring this video, is a name you should know. They're Australia's leading medical imaging recruitment specialists, and they don't just throw jobs at you. Their consultants actually take the time to understand what you're after. Whether it's a leadership role, or you want to relocate interstate, or you simply want to earn more in the setting that you enjoy. The team at Unite Healthcare have placed thousands of professionals from new grads to senior leaders in roles across every state and across every modality, from X-ray to CT, MRI, mammography, and ultrasound. And if you're an overseas trained radiographer, then they've even got pathways to help you get started in Australia. So if you're even just thinking about your next step, reach out to them. The team is always happy to chat. No pressure, just honest advice. I'll leave a link down below to their details and website, so do check them out if you're looking for a job or you know you will be looking for one in the near future. All right, let's keep going. So that's tip number 1, know your audience. Now let's move on to tip number 2, which is know your material back to front. And this is one of the main things that builds confidence. You always see, or I remember being a student and preparing for a presentation and just being extremely nervous before I went up to present. And when you ask yourself why that is, the main reason is because you don't know your content well enough. And also that it's potentially a group of people that you don't really know well, but that's not the main thing. I'll give you an example. If I was to tell you that you have to go up and present to a bunch of university students what basic addition and subtraction is and give a few examples, you wouldn't struggle with that because that's something that you know really, really well. Or let's say you come home after a long day and something interesting happened in that day and it really stuck with you. You come home and you want to explain to your family and friends. You don't have to prepare for that, because it's inherent within you. You know it really well, and so the delivery is going to be easy. But if you're researching something that's a little bit difficult, or you have to consult the literature to be able to come up with the presentation that you're going to give, that's new information that you're not really familiar with. That, for example, without notes and slides, you can't talk about it inherently with ease. And so in those situations, which is probably going to be most presenting situations you're faced with, you just have to do it over and over again so you know the material back to front. In our recent student presentations, I asked some of the really good ones how much they had presented their work, and they said about 4 to 5 times. And this was a group presentation, mind you. So if you're doing a group presentation and you've only really officially practiced it 1 or 2 or 3 times, I think that's not enough. You need to have done your reps. Put in the reps, present it multiple times, do it in front of a mirror, whatever it takes. So this is actually what I used to do when preparing for lectures. I would prepare my PowerPoint presentation on my computer, and once it was all done and I had all the animations and the notes and stuff ready, I would load it up on my phone, put my running and walking shoes on, and just go for a walk. Hour and a half walk, I would go in and just present to the air, okay? I'd have my phone in one hand and I'd pretend that I'm on stage. And I'd just go through that multiple times. And I did this on a walk partially because, you get some fresh air and it's nice to get out of the house every now and again, but also you practice your lung capacity, right? So if you're walking and you're nervous and you have to say a few words, all in order, you might start getting out of breath, and that's kind of good practice. So I would do that as I was talking on a walk. So then eventually when I do get on stage, or sort of when I'm presenting to my students or anyone else, even if my heart rate goes up, I've kind of prepared for it. So I really think if you can, that's a really good idea. Load it up on your phone or whatever device that you have, whether it's palm cards or whatever. Go for a walk, practice your talk multiple times. You have to get to a stage where ideally you look at a slide and you kind of know what to say just by looking at a few brief dot points. If you have to read off notes or palm cards the entire time, you're not prepared, okay? It's a presentation, it's not reading in front of people. So keep that in mind. And I know it's difficult to do, but you have to put in your reps. You have to know your material back to front. And one other tip that falls into this bucket in terms of confidence. They always ask me, like, how do I have the I'm nervous when I get up there. What do I do? And the way I think about it, at the end of the day, let's say you've prepared for your material well, or maybe you haven't slightly. At the end of the day, your presentation is just 10 minutes. By the end of that 10 minutes, you're going to sit down and no one's going to care. So what you really have to think is that in these next 5 to 10 minutes, you're playing a role. You're putting on a mask, getting in front of these people, and you're acting confident. Now, true confidence comes with doing the reps. However, if you want to fake it till you make it, if you will, pretend that you're putting on a mask, you're playing a confident character, you're doing this presentation, and then you're coming down. And I can promise you, as soon as you come down, everyone's already forgotten about you. Okay? Unless your presentation was excellent and they remember it. And I first learned about this mask idea in Robert Greene's excellent book, The Laws of Human Nature. It's basically like a textbook, but it's essentially 18 books into one. Highly, highly recommend it. And in particular, I'm referring to chapter 3, which is See Through People's Masks, the Role of Role Playing. So check that out if you have it on the side. Excellent resource for what I just said. Okay, so that's step number 2. Now, step number 3 is have a story. And I say this because I attended a bunch of different talks from 2 different conferences that I was recently at. One was ASMERT in Adelaide, and the other one was a breast imaging conference in Melbourne. And some of the talks that I attended, the ones that really stuck with me were the ones that where the speaker talking about the thing that they were talking about also added in a personal story that really resonated with me. So for example, if it was a presentation or talk about breast cancer, they talked about their own experience with breast cancer. And all of a sudden, it just becomes more real. You can feel the entire room just get quiet and pay attention with as much focus as they can give, because it's interesting, it's life or death. Or if you're talking about anything that's happening in your department, then you can give personal examples of things that you've experienced yourself relating to your talk. Have some kind of story. It always resonates more like that. And don't take my word for it. Go and search up some of the most popular TED Talks, and you'll find that the most engaging ones are where the speaker is telling you a story and also telling you about the topic almost in the background. It makes a huge difference. Now, if you think, I don't really have any stories to tell, try to think of one. I promise you can come up with something. And worst case, it doesn't have to be your particular story. It can be someone else's story that you're telling. So you can get pretty creative with it. So that was number 3, have a story. And number 4 is having a strong start. Now, this is something that I feel like is heavily overlooked, meaning it doesn't really get implemented much. Because when you're presenting or when you're preparing for your presentation, it may be an 8 to 10 minute presentation, some of the best parts of that talk is probably maybe halfway through or towards the end, because you're thinking, I'm going to build this up and then by the end have that sort of moment where I tell them about the most interesting information. That is the wrong way to do it. Okay, you have to put your good material, the most interesting part, at the very beginning of your presentations, almost in the first 30 seconds of your presentation, to really hook the person in. So what you want to do from the very beginning of your presentations, in the first few seconds, is tell them what they will expect to learn or get from your talk, aka your promise to them. And then once you do that, you deliver great and valuable information throughout, and then at the end, you'll fulfill on that promise that you gave in the beginning. I see so many students where the first thing they do is just start very monotone. Hi, my name is such and such, and in this presentation, we've researched on this particular topic, and then we're going to tell about it. And then they go on, and they've already lost me, okay? They've already lost half of the audience. But if instead they say, in the next 8 to 10 minutes, I'm going to tell you all my secrets and everything I've learned about how to become a better presenter, you've already caught them in. And then you introduce yourself, and then you give your credibility and everything that goes along with it, then starting your presentation. You have to draw and hook the person in from the very first few seconds. And that makes a massive difference, both in terms of your audience retention and the mark that you'll get later. And this is such an important concept that it doesn't just relate to presentations, it relates to everything. For example, I can work on this video for weeks and months, and I can make sure it's perfect. But if it doesn't have a good thumbnail, and if I don't hook the viewer in the first 30 seconds, they're not going to watch to the end. Okay, they're not going to get the benefit that you've worked so hard on throughout your presentation. So when you're getting up there and giving your talk that you've prepared for weeks and weeks, make sure you have a very strong start so that your audience sticks with you to the very end. So that was number 4, having a strong start. Number 5 is various different PowerPoint tips that I've learned along the years. And these are not really difficult, these are pretty simple ones, but they make the presentation much more effective. And there's a bunch of points to cover. The first thing is that you want simple and effective slides. There's nothing worse than having a slide that's extremely busy with text everywhere, so small that you can't follow what's happening. The advice that I would give is that your slide should be the guide to what you're saying. You are the presenter, and the slide shouldn't be the star of the show. You're the star of the show, and the slide is an aid and addition to what you're saying. So it doesn't make sense to have a whole bunch of text on your slide, because halfway through your talk, I, as the audience member, don't know, should I be listening to what you're saying, or I'm trying to match what you're saying with what the text is on the slide. I'm distracted. I don't know what's going on. So you need to have effective slides that don't have too much text on them, that it's easy to read, it's legible, and it's designed beautifully. So that too much text on the slide is always a pet peeve, and it's not just me, it's to everyone, because it just distracts from what you're saying as the presenter. The other thing is with graphs. I'm all for including graphs and in particular tables in your talks. However, if you're talking and then you show a graph for about 2 seconds and it goes away just because you wanted to show a graph in your presentation, you might as well have not put it there. Okay, the graph needs to, it's an illustration of something. So it needs to be actually telling me something interesting and useful along with your talk for it to be there. If you're talking about something, you bring up a graph, and then before I have time to comprehend what the graph is, it goes away to the next slide, you've failed what you should be doing for that particular slide. So when you're putting graphs, first of all, make sure they're actually big and legible. And second of all, talk me through the graph. Don't just show me a graph, talk me through what it means. Immediately when I see something, you have to first explain what are the X and Y axes, what is this graph actually graphing, and what's the purpose of it, what is it showing me? That's what you have to communicate to your audience anytime you're showing a graph or table in particular. And 2 other things that really make a difference, I think, is your animations, first of all, where, for example, you can have an appear animation or, fade animation or, cross fade animation, where instead of having the text and information all on the slide at once, as you're speaking, you can click, new information comes up. Then you're speaking, click, new information comes up. So that avoids, if you can't avoid a heavy slide, that's one way of easing the pain to your audience member. And the other thing is the morph transition. Now, this is my favorite thing in PowerPoint. So if you haven't heard of what the morph transition is, please go to YouTube right now, type in morph transition PowerPoint, and just watch a bunch of videos on how you can incorporate that into your presentation. You don't want to get too fancy with it, where each slide, turns into a scrunch ball, comes down, or like slides this way, goes that way. That gets too distracting, okay? Just have a few subtle transitions to make the audience member stick to what you're saying. Just have a few of those in your talk and I promise it will elevate it a lot more. I do it in my presentations all the time, so if you're a student of mine, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So that was number 5, effective slides. Number 6 is to present to communicate effectively, not just to sound smart. Now this sounds obvious at first, but I see it done way too many times, where the presenter is just using a lot of jargon and it sounds like they're smart, it sounds like they know what they're talking about. However, a real master is able to take a very difficult concept and explain it in terms that most people can understand. There's no prizes to be won for using very long words or very difficult words in combinations to each other just so you've said a definition. You're not impressing many people there. In fact, you're just confusing your audience member. And I've just seen this from some of my best lecturers that I've had over my undergrad and postgrad degrees. Out of the hundreds of teachers that I've had, only a handful of them really stood out because they were able to communicate their ideas effectively, have simple slides like the previous that we talked about, but just not make the things so difficult to understand, really break it down so we understand the concepts first, and then mention the technical term if you need to. And I see this a lot, particularly with student presentations, because first of all, it's difficult to break something down because it means you really have to understand it well in a short period of time. But I've also noticed this in big conferences as well. It doesn't just have to be students that do this. I see a lot of very senior people that when they get up there, they talk in very technical language and they sound very smart, and you get very humbled in those settings because you don't understand what's going on. But then you get someone up there that really explains things so clearly. It's still a difficult concept, but they use terms that you can understand. And you can just tell with everyone in the audience, they just light up. Everyone else that is just very monotonous tone, using difficult to understand words, you lose the audience. People start to drift off. Okay? So you need to make sure you're communicating effectively, not just to sound smart. One way I like to think about it is, if my job in this presentation was to, and I had one shot at this, to explain it to you in a way where you can then explain it to someone else very effectively, how would that look like? I can't be using very technical terms because I'm going to lose you. Okay? So I have to use very simple to understand language. Now there's obviously limits to that. Simple and easy to understand language and effective communication of my ideas so that you can retain that information the most effective. So then, therefore, you can go and explain it to someone else. That's the sort of way I try to understand it. Whereas if I go in and just read off notes and make sure I'm just using the technical terms that I found in the journal articles that I found online, it's not gonna retain in my audience's brain, okay? And therefore, they're not gonna be able to explain to someone else. If you've ever sat in a talk that's very much like that, you'll notice that as soon as they go off stage, you've forgotten everything they've said, okay? So the speaker there has not done their job effectively. So that was number 6, present to communicate effectively, not to sound smart. So number 7 is minimizing distractions. Now, there's a whole bunch of things that sort of fall in within this bucket. So I'll mention a few of them, but I'm sure after I do, you'll be able to come up with a few yourself that maybe you've fumbled across or you've seen other people be guilty of. One of the things is, for example, let's say you've prepared for weeks and weeks, you know exactly what you're saying, you get up there, you're trying to be confident or you are confident, and then you just are either too far away from the mic or too close to the mic. And all the audience member can think is the volume is too loud, or I can't hear them enough. So everything you've done to prepare beforehand almost goes out the window just by that simple thing of having the mic in a relatively appropriate distance from your mouth. Okay, so that's an important one. If you have your phone, put it on silent, put it on do not disturb, make sure it's not going to ring. Or if you have an Apple Watch or any smart device like that, make sure it's on do not disturb. So that's one type of distraction. But the other type of distraction is the clothing you're wearing. Try to be very presentable and wear polished and nice clothing when you're going up to present. It's going to help in your confidence levels, and it also adds to your presentation and aura when you're up there. Okay, so if you've been working on a presentation, I wouldn't probably show up in trackies. Okay, I'd probably wear something a bit nicer, do up your buttons correctly, so when you're up there, you look presentable and you're respecting your audience members. Now, I'm not saying you have to wear a suit and tie, just wear something presentable and nice, so when you're up there, the audience member isn't looking at your clothing and being distracted by it. They're seeing you as a presentable person, presenting information that you've researched and they're interested to hear about it. So that was number 7, minimizing distractions. Number 8 is your presentation dynamics. And by this, I basically want you to avoid standing in one place and having a very monotonous, sort of monotone voice. If you're a single presenter, meaning you're the only one up there, first of all, know your presentation enough where you don't have to be behind the lectern or the mic or whatever and not move. I usually try to move around, use hand gestures as much as I can, change my tone, go high pitch, low pitch, or louder and softer, have pauses in between, so I can communicate my ideas effectively. I'm not standing there in one position, saying my talk in one tone where I'm losing everyone as I'm talking. It's always more interesting when you walk around a little bit, not too much. If you're trying to explain something that's more, you walk to this side, or less, like that. So use your body language, use your arms, use your spine and posture. Use the differentiations in your tone to be able to articulate ideas effectively, and even potentially bring in different objects to show your audience to highlight what you're talking about. So that's if you're a single presenter. If you're a group presentation, don't be afraid to experiment with different things. Instead of just having one person and then the next person talk, and then the next person talk, and then the next person, and then it ends. That's a very standard way of doing things. In our students' presentations, I saw a bunch of them do a debate format, which was really interesting. One of them had a question and answer, where one person was asking a question, the sort of a patient, if you will, and the other member was answering that patient's concerns. And that was one part of the presentation. That was very interesting. It made me focus on what they were saying. So play around with different formats. You can do role play, you can do discussions, you can do case studies. Case studies is really interesting, where you bring in different examples of things that you've either seen clinically or some things that you've seen in a particular journal, and you bring that in as a proper example to showcase the thing you're talking about. Basically anything to have you stick out and retain your audience's engagement. So that was number 8, your presentation dynamics. And then number 9 is looking at your audience and gauging how they are throughout your presentation. Now, this is something that I usually do for my students, but it's something that you should probably pay attention to as well. When you're doing your talk, if it's only 5 minutes, probably not too relevant. But if it's 10 minutes or more, or maybe 8 to 10 minutes or more, you really want to be looking at your audience, engaging their reactions, and then in real time, altering your delivery to their reaction. Okay. So for example, you could say something to me in your presentation, and I just do one of these. I tilt my head slightly, I look a bit concerned. That's saying that whatever you just said, I missed it. Okay. I didn't understand what you just said. But at the same time, if someone else is going like this, they're following you. They're understanding what you're saying. Okay, so you can continue at that pace. But if someone is confused or just, I'm not sure what's going on, they're doing one of these, right? They're trying to think about what you just said, but you've already moved on to the next point. Okay, so as an audience member, as a listener, it's very difficult to keep up. So if you see that reaction in your audience, just say to them, hey, maybe I've lost you. Let me go back and explain that bit again. And the same thing, for example, if you see a few people yawning. Now, that may be because they've been at a few other talks and yours is the 14th one, and they're just tired of sitting around. That's fine. There's different ways to actually get them engaged, as we've talked about so far. But if someone is yawning and really just sort of dozing off, that's your chance to know, hey, maybe I'm delivering it in a very monotone way. Let me change my pace. Let me change my tone. Maybe let me ask them a question right now, so to bring them back in, and I can continue what I was saying before. So you've got to be ready to do those different deliveries and change them in real time when you see those body language and reaction from your audience. Now, this body language is hard to understand at first, but I would really recommend this podcast from the Diary of a CEO with Vanessa Van Edwards. I'll link it down below. That was a fascinating watch, and it really shows how you can identify your audience's engagement, or really not just that, but any other body language that people are portraying and what it really means. So if you haven't seen that, I'll definitely check it out if I were you. So that was number 9, look at your audience, engage their reactions. Number 10, very last one, is to be generous with your energy. Okay, so this feeds into the confidence. When you get up there, be excited to get up there. Okay, I see a lot of students being really not confident and scared to get up there. And a mind hack that I don't know who I learned this from, it was someone in my undergrad told me about this. And they said, when you get up there, there's no reason to be nervous, because what's really happening is you've done research on this particular topic for the past few weeks. You know the most about it right now. You're very excited to share this information with the audience, and they're very keen to hear it from you. So it's not the case that I'm going to get up there, I'm going to mess up. It's the case that I can't wait to get up there and tell them about this interesting information that I've learned over the past few weeks. So try to be excited to present, really amp yourself up, because when you're generous with your energy to your audience, they're generous back to you with their attention. And what goes along with that is you being able to enunciate your words properly. Me, for example, my general state of being is mumbling my words. Now hopefully that doesn't show up on camera, because I'm actively putting energy and enunciating my words so you can understand it effectively. If you're someone like that, if you're like me, where when you're talking to your friends and family, you are kind of monotone and you blur your words together, and people have noticed that about you, make sure to make an active effort to not do that when you're up there and presenting. Be generous with your energy, okay? It makes a big difference. Now, what it looks like in day-to-day conversation, if I'm having a conversation with you in real life, out of 10 energy, 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest, if I give you 5 out of 10 energy in real life, that equates to you receiving that energy 5 out of 10. But if I give 5 out of 10 energy on camera, that comes across as almost 2 to 3 out of 10. And that also translates into your presentations. If you were to give someone, when you're up there, 5 out of 10 energy, they're going to receive it with lower energy. I don't know why this is, but this is always the case. You have to give 8 to 9 out of 10 energy for you as the receiver and viewer of this to receive it as a 5 out of 10 energy. Right now, this is not how I talk in real life. I'm putting a lot of energy and effort and enunciating my words and being generous with my energy so I can communicate effectively to you. So hopefully it comes out relatively natural when you're viewing it on the other end. And it's no different to your presentations. Be generous with your energy, because they'll be generous with their attention. All right, well done for sticking to the end. That was a lot we got through. My 10 secret tips, well, not so secret anymore, on how to become a better presenter and speaker. And as a thank you for sticking to the end, I wanted to give you a bonus tip, which I've recently learned and has really helped me take my presentations and delivery and confidence to a whole new level. But before I tell you, could I please ask you to like the video if you've got any value out of it so far, and please share it with someone that you think will find it valuable. I really appreciate it. The likes do really make a difference. And my bonus tip is, if you're struggling with confidence or presenting, or maybe it's an interview setting and you're nervous for that interview, one of the best things that you can do is put up a camera, press record, and do your presentation. Okay? You'll realize how difficult that actually is when you press record and you try to say your presentation. You'll stumble the first few times, okay? Because you may practice your talk when you're in a room, when you're going on a walk, as we talked about. However, the stakes are quite low in that sense. You're going from an environment where there's no one there, no one's really listening to you, you're just practicing, to then all of a sudden in front of 50 or 80 people, and the stakes are a lot higher. So to match that level of intensity, when you put up a camera, whether it's your phone or anything that you have, or your webcam on your computer, press record, it feels like someone is watching you. And so you get this sort of sudden jolt in your body where you feel like you have to perform properly. So I first learned this technique from this guy called Vin. He actually did a podcast, again, with a Diary of a CEO. I love that podcast. I'll link that down below. And he tells you his framework for becoming a lot more confident, or in really whatever. First, he says, put up a camera, press record, and do your presentation or do your talk. Then rewatch that recording, but with the audio off. So you're just looking at your body language. Take notes on that. And then watch the recording again, but without any video. So you're just listening to your words. How many ums, how many ahs are you saying? How long are you waiting between things? How many cuts did you have, etc.? Take notes. And then watch the whole thing together, so with audio and video, and really see how you're presenting in front of a camera. If you're able to then take those notes, repeat the recording, and become better at it, that's the best way that I've found in becoming a proficient speaker and effective presenter. It's very hard to do, Okay, I would know this because I've been doing this where there's no one else in the room, it's just me and a camera. I've been doing this for over 2 years now. And when you first press record, it's very nerve-wracking. And if you haven't done it yet, you don't know what I'm talking about until you do it yourself. So if you really want to take things to the next level, whether it's you presenting or a group of students that you're presenting, record yourself and rewatch the recording. Take notes, make sure to improve upon those notes the next time, do that again, and then do that again, and then do that again. If you haven't practiced your talk 10 times, you can't complain about being not confident and not ready. You have to put in the reps and do it over and over and over again so you know your material back to front, so you can deliver it effectively using all the techniques we talked about. All right, that's it for this video. I hope you found that useful. Again, please give it a like if you got any value out of it. Again, check out all the resources and links in the description, which I think you'll find quite useful. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Stay curious.